The first thing we need to understand about economic injustice is that it's not an accident.
It isn't the same Boston for everyone. You know, we still see where there's sharp inequities.
How do we make sure that there is an inclusive way for people to thrive as the city of Boston is growing? And how do we maintain the diversity that makes us vibrant?
The diversity allows for a lot of expansion. It allows for a lot of inclusion from many different faces and many different voices.
So now we've got to ask ourselves hard questions about how we create a distribution that honors the legacies of people, sets them up for success going forward, and gives them the autonomy that we all deserve to make choices for ourselves.
What I've found is that regardless of whether the market is up or the market is down, it is always those with the limited resources that suffer the most. And I just can't understand why we accept that. I think we should hold ourselves accountable as a community, as a network, to say that that should not be.
The people in the community had such understanding of where they are and where they at and what they need. Sitting there on their mind, in their hearts, that they needed to somebody to say, you know, we are listening to you.
Whether it is the wealth gap, the health gap, the education gap, regardless of the metric, you will see that Black and brown communities are at the bottom of each and every one of those scales.
Prosperity to me is really ensuring that our families and our students have everything they need to thrive. That means a very solid education, good academic skills, lots of opportunities in college and career. It means making sure and helping our families tap into the supports that are out there.
Financial prosperity to me means a resident being able to afford the incidental things that happen.
Most significant issues are still, the housing crisis. It really is a crisis. The cost of housing has increased dramatically. Getting out of this housing crisis is not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to take just one program or one solution. That includes, yes, building more housing, but also figuring out ways to make existing housing more livable.
I can't look at economic justice without looking at housing, without looking at people having enough food to eat, without looking at being able to have health care, having the cushion that when something happens, I don't have to panic.
United Way, he's listening to us. There is somebody that is interested in knowing, okay, this is, what we need.
And United Way's made a deep commitment with us to work with that local community in a way that's going to change lives.
Anytime I have a question about funding, I reach out to the United Way first. They're very willing to help us bridge some barriers.
Whatever is a part of the vision for improvement, development, and sustainability in Greater Boston, I'm up for the challenge with United Way.
Good morning. Can you all hear me? All right. Welcome to this beautiful space and this kickoff of United Way's new strategy. I'm Rich Moshe, board chair of United Way of Mass Bay, and I'm excited to start us off. This launch makes me think about a story I heard recently about the Northern Ireland Peace Accord, signed 25 years ago this month. In 1995, George Mitchell, a retired Senate leader, was tapped by President Clinton to serve as special envoy to broker a peace in that battle-torn region. It was viewed as an impossible task, yet he resolved this decades-old conflict in just over 3 years. His secret? He visited with the leaders of the many opposing factions and heard them out. He gave them the space to air their grievances and their objectives, and through this patient listening, he became a trusted, honest broker. It also gave him the perspective to find the through line that could unite them. In the words of one leader, he listened us to agreement. What a phrase, he listened us to agreement. I tell this story because the power of listening is at the heart of our several-year journey to a new strategy. In reimagining United Way, we had to answer 4 questions. What, why, what, where, and how. To answer these questions, we talked to just about everybody. Our community residents and leaders, nonprofit partners, corporate partners, government leaders, donors, experts in philanthropy. The why was firmly resolved. Our mission is to promote an economically just region where access to opportunity is universal and prosperity is shared across race and ethnicity. Then came what? What issue areas would achieve this mission and have the greatest impact on people's lives? Today's program will tell you where we landed on that question. The answer to where was clear when we looked at poverty as a marker of inequality and inequity. This highlighted 12 communities where the majority of individuals below the poverty line live in our region. And lastly, how would we accomplish this mission? We went to the real experts, our communities. Through interviews, town halls, and focus groups, we asked the communities that we partner with for their take. How do they define economic well-being? What agencies and resources were already on the ground that we should partner with? How could we assist through our special skill as convener and uniter and our resources to braid a coalition to impact these crucial areas comprehensively, locally? These past 3 years have been a process I'll call activist listening to reach this moment. And that process will continue because we are committed to keeping our communities at the center of our work and to convening partners to accomplish our mission. We've set ourselves a big task to achieve population level improvement, tested against defined metrics, despite all the inertial forces of wealth and privilege arrayed in opposition. Given our mission, we had no choice but to aim big. And big objectives can only be achieved with united, collaborative effort. That is our special skill set, to be uniters for change. So today, after all this listening, we are going to pause to do a little telling. And for that, it's my special honor to introduce our president and CEO and my good friend, Bob Giannino, whose energy, talent, and vision have led us to this day to take the next steps in our journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. What a day that a lot of us have been waiting for, and that we're so excited to have you all here with us. Rich, I want to thank you for being such an incredible partner to me and to our whole organization over these last couple of years. We would not be here without your partnership and support, so thank you for that. And thank you all for joining us here today, whether you're here in person or on live stream, and at home or in our office or in offices across the city. My name is Bob Giannino, and I'm the proud Anson President and CEO of the United Way of Massachusetts Bay. And before I begin, we'd like to gratefully acknowledge that this territory is the ancestral homeland of the Massachusetts and Wampanoag people. And while we honor the ancestral homelands on which we gather and the diverse Native people who contribute to the vibrance of our community, we know that this acknowledgement does not sufficiently undo the harm that has been and continues to be perpetrated against Indigenous peoples. At United Way, we are committed to uplifting the voices and the experiences of our marginalized community members, and we are here today to affirm and double down on that promise. I am honored to be in this leadership role, working with an amazing team, many of whom are in this room today or are tuning in from our watch party in our office in Boston. I joined United Way within the first few months of the COVID-19 emergency, nearly 3 years ago now, when so many of our community members were experiencing incredible challenges. I was so blown away by the response of our nonprofit partners serving on the front lines, constantly pivoting their practices in support of their communities, and so many of our neighbors who jumped in to support their neighbors, regardless of whether they knew them well or at all. We also witnessed our corporate, public, and philanthropic sectors lock arms with us, unleashing valuable resources to ensure that our communities had what they need to be safe and supported. We've raised more than $75 million in COVID response funding since the start of the pandemic. And I've been so impressed by our organization's ability to unite people across various sectors to unlock opportunities for others. I came to United Way with an admiration for the legacy of our work in the community, but also with a desire to dig deeper. While I was coming on board United Way, a long overdue racial reckoning was happening in our country in response to the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and too many other Black Americans. The disparate impacts of these twin pandemics laid bare inequities that have persisted in our communities, particularly communities of color, for far too long. I was excited to join United Way because I saw a potential to focus the organization on equity-driven solutions that support our most marginalized residents. The role that United Way has played and continues to play in our region is incredibly unique. Locally, there is no other organization that sits at the nexus of the nonprofit, public, private, and philanthropic sectors the way we do. We have an opportunity to harness that unique intersectionality of our organization to drive long-term, equitable, sustainable change that are centered on our community's wants and needs. And that's the moment we find ourselves in. United Way is well known for its ability to support individuals in meeting their immediate needs in a crisis. However, given that many of our community members live in crisis conditions every day, we recognize the urgent need to invest in helping them achieve longer-term financial well-being. We heard from some community leaders in the video that just played what financial prosperity means to them. And we've, as Rich mentioned, been engaging with stakeholders across our region for some time now, asking that very question. And through those conversations, we've identified avenues to prosperity, areas of work in which United Way has an established track record of driving impact, in which we can go deeper. Our strategies to achieve impact in these areas are more refined and focused than ever before, as we will concentrate our efforts in certain cities and towns and closely monitor population-level metrics to ensure we are driving the change we need to experience in our communities. And I look forward to talking a little bit more about that later in the program. Today, we have a tremendous opportunity to hear from community leaders and advocates who share our vision for economic justice and who work to ensure financial prosperity for all through their work each and every day. I am so thankful to everyone who is here today to talk about how expanding our 4 avenues to prosperity will help us build more equitable communities together. Our moderator for today's discussion is a local media powerhouse. She's been the general manager for television at GBH since 2011. Liz Cheng is GBH's, I'm swapping in an introduction here. Liz Cheng is GBH's general manager for television, overseeing 7 Boston channels and the national 24/7 nonfiction World Channel, reaching 77% of US TV households, and featuring 4 series she co-created: America Reframed, Local, USA, and Doc World, and the stories from the stage, broadcast, and podcast. Cheng's series have won a National Emmy, a Peabody, a Webby's, and prizes from Alfred I. DuPont Columbia and the International Documentary Association, as well as many national awards honoring diversity. Liz is also an incredibly deeply member of our board, the board of the Massachusetts Coalition for the Homeless, and serves as she's the president of the board of the Massachusetts Coalition for the Homeless and vice chair of the board of directors of the partnership. She has provided me and all of us with strong leadership and guidance around many facets of our work, including our civic engagement in the community, our focus on racial justice and equity, and raising awareness of the pressing needs and issues in our community. Notably, Liz is a voice that consistently and strongly advocates for, quote, being on the right side of history, unquote, as she often says to us. During her tenure on our board, she has been a steadfast advocate for transparency and for boldly calling out the injustices we encounter in our work. Please join me in welcoming Liz Cheng to the stage.
While we're waiting to set up, I thought I would just say how excited I am about the new direction that United Way is going. It makes total sense to concentrate our resources and energies on the 12 communities across Massachusetts that need our most help. And those are those who are certainly below the poverty level. And what better way than in the 4 pillars that United Way has pulled together? Wealth building, education for children and career pathways for young adults, and safe and stable housing. After all, isn't this what we all want for ourselves and for the people we care about? And what United Way is asking us to do is to widen that circle of people we care about. So to help us arrive, and understand how we got to such disparities and what we can do around them, I am asking our panel to come up, please. I'll introduce you while we're still, so I'll be at the end, and then Lorna, you will be next to me, Director of the Maurizio Gaston Institute for Latino Public Policy at UMass. She's a leading scholar in social welfare reform, policies, health-based disparities, especially due to the impact of COVID-19. She's heading up 3 different studies on that. Education and literacy programs and their impact on Latino communities. Next up, who should be Ron Dorsey? Oh, that's okay. We'll do things out of order. That's totally fine. Next to me will be Joe Kreisberg, President and CEO of Mass Inc., a nonpartisan think tank dedicated to making Massachusetts a place for inclusive civic and economic opportunity. Prior to Mass Inc., he spent nearly 30 years at the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations. Next to him is Corey Shears. He's a wastewater instructor at Excel Education. He was named the 2023 Core Member of the Year by Core Network, a National Association of Service and Conservation. Corey is an instructor and advocate for water quality in Massachusetts. And then next to him is Inez Palmerin. She is the Working Cities Manager at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Before that, she was the Senior Program Officer at LISC Boston. She spent more than a decade as a senior planner at the Boston Redevelopment Authority. And then, of course, last but not least, is Ron Dorsey, Chief Impact Officer at Eastern Bank Foundation and a researcher, policymaker, strategist, devoted to civic innovation, economic mobility, and inclusion. We also know him as the former Chief of Education for the City of Boston. So please welcome my panel. So recently, I was listening to an NPR podcast on poverty, and I have to say, I was struck by the language used by detractors against people of color, BIPOC against immigrants, and how that language of disparity and blame was very much like the language used against the underprivileged and the under-resourced. And I was struck by that. And one of the phrases that kept coming up for people who were detractors was the phrase, "Why can't they just pull themselves up by their bootstraps?" And I found an interesting quote from Martin Luther King that addressed this. As he said, "It is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself up by his bootstraps." And that's pretty much what we're talking about here today. So if I could start with Ron about the disparities that exist for BIPOC people, most especially African Americans in our city and across Massachusetts and across the country. What are some of the systemic problems that still exist that make it so difficult for African Americans to get a leg up?
Thank you, Liz, and it's good to be up here with everybody this morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. All right, that's pretty robust. You must have had a little coffee. So this is a big question, and it's kind of trying to explain the history of the world in 2 minutes. I think I'm going to talk at a high abstract level, but I think I want folks to understand that what I'm talking about reproduces itself in every age. And so there's a version of history where we can say that's what used to be, but it is very much the case that it still is. And so when we start with myths about inferiority, myths about manifest destiny, that reproduce themselves age after age, it then justifies exploitation and exclusion. You only have to look at the last 4 years of politics in our country to see how the myths perpetuate and modernize in some ways. But then when you start honing the tools for subjugation in society to say that as it is becoming more profitable, as it is reproducing power, we need to hold the social order so that there is a bifurcation, that there is a hierarchy that is maintained. And so then we create systems that keep manufacturing exclusion, exploitation, disparity. We create housing markets and practices that reinforce segregation across cities. We tie access to quality schools to the tax code. So those who can pay the most in kind of get the most. When we reinforce patterns of segregation across the housing market, it determines access to nearly everything: healthcare, education, employment. Just by way of a quick example, and I think you can see it structurally playing out in Boston as it has in many ways, several miles from here, Nubian Square. A place that we claim rhetorically is the heart of culture in a lot of ways in Boston, the place that has been home to the Black community since the Black community was run off of Beacon Hill and run out of the South End. Whole lot of stories to tell about redlining, urban renewal that have led to the current history or the modern history of what is now Nubian Square. Flash forward to George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. All of our organizations, probably for the most part, adopted a DEI statement. Many of the corporate organizations that some of us work for, I'll raise my hand as well, said that we're going to open up our treasuries and make very deep investments in Black communities. We got the statements. I think we believe the rhetoric, maybe. But if you go to Nubian Square, where there are probably 5 or 6 projects being led by Black developers that would probably take a collective $100 million to $200 million to get off of the ground, not project by project, but to make sure that you solidify every development, pass on wealth, and create jobs. Almost all of those projects, including one that I'm involved in, are having a hard time raising capital right now. There should be fleets of Brinks trucks passing through Nubian Square right now if Boston is about it.
Thank you, Ron. And Lorna, in much the same way, Latinos, Asians, Arabs, and other new immigrant groups continue to struggle, and they continue to be blamed for, that the struggle continues. What are some of the obstacles, and what are some of the ways in which we can help that population?
Well, thank you again for inviting me, and thank you for everyone for being here. We always talk about Boston as a city of immigrants, and we have to think about, well, what is our current, what are the differences, right, with the immigrants that are, continuing to come to our city versus, the immigrants of, we talk about the Irish and the Italians. What we're really seeing is, this manifest destiny ideology is what really, and U.S. imperialism is what led to, right, many Latinx immigrants coming, to the United States. But we have to think, what are the subgroup differences? Like the experiences of Puerto Ricans, for example, who are U.S. citizens, and have been coming here since the 1800s, and settling as agricultural workers and, basically labor policies, right, to bring workers, to the United States and exploit them. We've done that with Mexicans, and then with the U.S. interventions that we've done in Central America, this is why we also have, the largest Salvadoran communities here, Guatemalan, Honduran. What's happened in other U.S. military interventions in South America, right? Why we have so many Colombians here. And what we'll find is they're settling in particular neighborhoods where there's other members of their home countries there. So you'll have the Dominicans from Bani in Jamaica Plain, Colombians from Don Matias in East Boston. So for us to think about that, we can't just lump them all in one, bucket, that there are particular U.S. policies that have fueled, this migration historically and contemporarily, as we see on our U.S. On the southern border. And we have to have better data, right, to understand those subgroup differences. So we understand what might be the challenges, particularly facing those who are undocumented, fleeing trauma and violence, versus those that are coming here on work visas, right? And so I think that there's a lot of ways that with the United Way's, new directions of looking at these challenges more, as communities and as subgroups, right? And really understanding the political and the economic circumstances of our different ethnic groups that have been settling in Boston.
So to follow up on that, it's often stated that what gets measured gets done. So you mentioned data points. What data points should we be tracking in order to how best to deploy our resources and also to see how we're moving the needle?
Yeah, well, so one of the points is first to have like a data equity bill passed finally in our state legislature. That is being opposed by some groups. For, interesting reasons, right, in terms of not trusting the government, coming from countries where, like China, where there's a lot of distrust in identifying with your race and ethnicity. So until all of our state agencies are also collecting that subgroup data, we're not going to know where those disparities are. And also, we're not also thinking about English proficiency as a data point. there's so many multiple languages now from the diversity of our immigrant groups that we don't have interpretation and translation. And so there isn't that access that, that we really need to serve, some of our newcomers. So I think we have a lot of work to do around data points on subgroups, data points around English proficiency, and there's a lot more that I could say.
But thank you, yes. And Joe, one of the 4 pillars that United Way is concentrating on is affordable housing. And certainly here in Boston, I think we all have stories and we've all experienced this, how difficult it is. It's just becoming out of reach, not only in Boston, but so many of our smaller cities and towns in greater Boston across the state. How does this impact the communities that we're trying to help, and what can we do about that?
Well, thanks for the question, Liz, and thanks to the United Way for including me in this conversation. And boy, it's hard to answer that quickly, but I mean, clearly what we're seeing across the region are people being forced to move from the communities where they've grown up, where they've lived, where their families are, where their jobs are. And that migration, which is cutting in different directions across the region, is incredibly disruptive to people's lives. And increasingly, there's nowhere to go. And we don't have a good transportation system, which everybody here knows. So as these distances increases, the problems magnify. And I think that the housing crisis is important to understand. We use that term, everybody sort of nods knowingly, but it manifests differently for different people in different life stages, whether you're a young adult, whether you're a retired person, and everything in between, trying to raise kids. It also manifests differently across space and geography. And, one of the things I think that we're going to see is the 12 municipalities that you've identified. One of the things I think the United Way needs to track is how are populations shifting out of those municipalities or into them, and how is that changing things? So just to say, there's the affordability issue, which we all know, but there's also issues around quality. We still have a lot of housing in our state, especially in some of our lower income communities and gateway cities, that is of poor quality. There's the segregation aspect of it, which relates to affordability, but it's not just about affordability. So there's many dimensions, and therefore probably many data points that the United Way will want to keep track of. And we'll talk about solutions later, right?
Yep,
okay, so
absolutely.
I'll stop there for
sooner
now.
Sooner than we certainly expect, but yes. And certainly one of the many ways it impacts, of course, as we've been talking about, is education. So Ron, Massachusetts had some of the highest education costs in the nation. How do we improve access, quality, and affordability of early education and after-school programs?
So I'm looking at Amy Squared over here, Amy Kershaw and Amy O'Leary, to make sure I don't get too much wrong here. And there are some other people in the audience who are friends. So stand up and tell me you got it wrong, and I'll pass you the mic. Where early education and out-of-school time are concerned, there is not civic agreement that they are public goods. I think that is the root of the challenge. So if there's no agreement on that, then they become nice-to-haves. And they live in some gray area between the public sector and the private sector, getting under-resourced for the most part. And in the case of both, they are primarily funded by families. Families are the financing system. Each gets a little bit of public money. I would say maybe out-of-school time, as differentiated from early education, relies on the generosity of the philanthropic sector to some great degree. But in each of our households, in each of our communities, I think we say to each other, every child needs the right start in life. I think we say to each other, every kid needs a high quality experience beyond the school day, and to be involved in things that honestly, I think if we tell the truth about the nonprofit youth serving sector here, which is probably the greatest in America, and I would defy Oakland, Chicago, and New York to say differently, these are the places where young people learn to become agents. These are the places that actually do a better job at generating and building 21st century skills than your school classroom. And sorry if I'm offending any educators, but we could talk about that as well. Because there's a different kind of partnership and seamlessness to be had here if we are all about young people at the end of the day. So if we use language like that in our homes and in our communities, we are basically saying we have a desire for a public good, but the civic agreement has not gone to the point where we are willing to make the investment for that to be true. I think what will be a challenge, and Amy O'Leary is going to knock this out, so I'm not even afraid. In order for us to get to a place where these things are public goods, I think our imagination is that there's going to be a moment at which the public sector says, you know what, there's a grand bargain and we're all in. If this thing costs $1 million, $100 million, $1 billion, $1 trillion, we're all in. I'm not sure that that's going to be the road to this either becoming a public good. The road may be public-private partnership. It may be blended capital to get us there to a point where government can fully sustain the investment and the guarantees of making this a public good. Part of the reason I don't think that it's going to happen through a huge government leap is that it still requires some level of innovation and invention of the systems that we need. And beyond NASA and a couple of other departments, government is not good at R&D and does not do much innovation. So it will take community folks. It will take some private sector folks. It will take public folks and nonprofit folks to keep doing the invention and co-investing until we get to the place where we've created the container that we want for full public investment.
Thank you. And as Rich mentioned earlier, listening to the community is a core strategy for the United Way. Talk to us about listening to local leaders and community-based organizations and how they can make a difference.
Sure. I think listening and engagement is important, but just equally as important is people that we're trying to help and support. They have solutions themselves, and I think a lot of times we don't reach out and we don't really let people in the design of programming. And at the Federal Reserve, one of the things I've been working on with our working cities, and we're in 35 communities, rural and small cities, is how do you get people closer to the decision-making table that are being affected? If we are really talking about inclusive economies, you have to include the people that economy is not working for. And that's huge because a lot of us mean well. And I think at this day and age, as the panelists before me spoke about, it's just not enough. And so our communities have solutions. I've seen a lot of changes in how nonprofits are engaging, especially past COVID, because during COVID, we surely learned the hard way that you need to use the community networks to get things done. And the local leaders were the ones that stepped up first and made it happen. While everyone else was trying to figure out what to do, neighbors were already doing it, local leaders were already trying to figure out the food situation, childcare situation for people that needed to get back to work. So I just, that's what I've been, in 20 plus years, 25 years, I'm aging myself in economic development. I'm these days, that's what I'm focusing on. How can we support local leaders, be true partners to their work? And everything else is basically embracing them because they need a lot of support, but collaborating with each other and trying to figure out where we can add value. I think the days are gone of this sort of competitiveness and leaving people, to the side. It just doesn't work anymore.
Can you describe something specific that where community came up with their own solution and how organizations like you could help them?
So we have one of our cities in Fitchburg. I know it's not one of the 12, but
That's okay.
We have a very, right now I'm co-leading an effort called Leaders for Equitable Local Economies, doing just that, supporting local leaders, stipending them for their work. These are people that have other jobs, but because they're community leaders and are interested and they basically brought projects or initiatives to us, and we're funding their time. But we're also basically just supporting them with $31,000 for their initiative. $31,000 is what happened in Fitchburg. 2 women who don't speak Spanish got translators and interpreters and provided certification classes for childcare. Over 50 Latina women have graduated from that program over Zoom which, you know, and I always tell this story, and I actually told it to the president of the bank. When we think about childcare and workforce and supporting families and children, right? I've been at this for a long time. We've give grants, huge grants, $200,000, $300,000, and people can tell you, I can't find people. And these two women who this is not their primary job have figured out how to do that. So those are the kind of inclusive strategies and that's happening real time that I'm like, we're not paying attention to something here. We're missing some stuff if we're not really thinking about how the people in the community are figuring it out on their own and how we can support that.
That's wonderful. And by elevating what they're doing, you're modeling to other communities programs that could work fairly easily and with low investment of money and help the greatest number of people. So that's just wonderful. Corey, another pillar, of course, for United Way is training programs, another key strategy. Can you tell us how you were helped and now how you're helping others in the program that you're in now?
Absolutely. So I started with Excel about, well, not even, it hasn't even been a year. So last May is when I came into the program. When I came into the program, I wasn't working, and I didn't even have so much as a driver's license. And now, a year later, I have my driver's license, I have 3 wastewater licenses, I won Core Member of the Year, and now I'm here speaking to you all. So I learned quite a lot about how fast life can change when you have the right program, and more importantly, the right people supporting you. And not everyone has that, you know? Like, without the program, where would I be? I couldn't tell you. Yesterday, I was actually studying with one of our students, and he has been to jail, and he only has an 8th grade education. So, and he's coming to our program to try to better his life. Like, without youth programs, where would he have to go? Well, he would probably go back to jail because he has no other avenue to better himself. So I think, you know, youth programs are definitely the way to not only help people with a different avenue other than college, but to save people who need the extra help.
Absolutely, paying it forward. And it seems to me companies could benefit from this as well. I mean, how many times have we heard we don't have skilled workers, we can't find people to fill positions, whether it's daycare or your work. What would you say to companies about training programs like yours?
Well, training programs like ours, if you're gonna do a youth program, then I definitely believe that you have to have, first, I believe you have to know to not be a boss, but to be a leader. And sometimes when you're a leader, sometimes your job is to just step down, step away, and let the young person talk to the people in charge with their own voice, represent themselves. Another thing is to have an open mind and don't be the person that says, well, I've been in this business 20 years and I don't need to listen to someone who's been here a month. Because just because things have been done a certain way doesn't mean it's the best way. And the way to find the best way is to get new perspectives, new ideas, new people involved in the company or whatever you're trying to run.
It's a real example from growing from within, you know, so
Yes.
what better, it's sort of the internship programs, but on steroids in a way so that you can actually grow your next workforce. That makes sense. So this is more of the free-for-all part of the conversation where we can really concentrate on solutions. And why don't we start with the first wealth building. What can we do to kind of help communities, whether they're BIPOC or immigrant or all of the above, to help them in that process?
I can start. Well, I think one of the main issues affecting at least the Latinx and also Asian communities is that we're highly concentrated in low-paying jobs, like in the service industry. And so that occupational segregation is really preventing, you know, social mobility. And that's intersecting with low educational status too. But we also have immigrants that are very highly skilled. and we don't accept their diplomas. So we do need to have also more reciprocity in accepting, that you have a medical degree in Haiti, you can be a doctor here too. And so how do we provide some of that training and those career ladders, both for our professional immigrants, but also more opportunities to get out of these low-paying jobs with more training, and English classes is a really important part of that.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, I believe when it comes to building wealth, it starts from the very basics, like, high school, for example. In high school, they don't teach how to build wealth. They don't teach you how to write a check. They don't teach you credit. They don't teach you about taxes. So when these young people come out of high school and into college, they don't know even how to start with any of those things, and they're all very important to know. I myself actually just started building my credit because for a long time it's not something that's in your face, so I didn't feel it was super necessary, even though it is.
Absolutely. And certainly programs and access to that, and certainly having translation and all of the above is important to connect people with services to sort of help them in that. The second pillar, affordable housing. Joe, why don't we start with you in terms of affordable housing? I mean, we've heard about, wanting to build affordable housing near metro systems, near transportation, how NIMBY has come into it. Many buildings have been stalled, transition from office building to living buildings, and all of the above. Talk a little bit about that. What's being done, and what can we double down on?
Sure. Well, there's a lot being done and there's a lot to do. And as I mentioned earlier, housing problem manifests in so many different ways. We need multiple solutions. And, I was thinking about your opening comment about the cruelty of talking about pulling up your bootstraps. Right now, we have one affordable home for every 4 families and households that need one. And so it seems pretty cruel to say to the 3 who didn't win the lottery that it's somehow their fault when those homes don't exist. And so, we need to create a lot more housing of every type in every place. And we also need to help make sure that people have the resources that they can afford the housing that exists. If you only do one of those things, it's not going to achieve our goals, because if you build more housing but people can't afford it, that doesn't meet our goals. But if you just put more money into the system without creating more units, you can't buy what doesn't exist. You can't rent what doesn't exist. So you really have to do both. And, happily, we are investing more money in housing at the state level than we have ever before. As far as I know, over $1 billion a year. We still need a lot more at every level of government. There are significant efforts to try to produce more housing. Unfortunately, that takes time, and we're swimming upstream right now with interest rates and credit crunch and so forth. So it's not going to be easy. And I guess, just the last thing I would say, and you mentioned NIMBYism, and we heard about, the story about Northern Ireland, and Inez was talking about listening. I mean, I think that we're not going to address this housing problem unless we solve our civic problem around how people think about their communities and their neighbors. I liked what, I forget now who said this, inviting us to care about more people and than just our immediate family, our immediate needs. So we have to fix some of what's broken in our civic engagement and how we make collective decisions to give more people an opportunity to have their voices heard, and make sure that we're getting decisions on a new housing policy that work for everybody.
You mentioned earlier, while we were talking in the green room, about how this has turned into a very cruel musical chairs, where there's one chair and there are 4 people circling those chairs. And usually it's those people who are better resourced, who have access to language translations, access to programs, and all of the above. It seems to me that there are lots of civic organizations and certainly kind of quasi nonprofit organizations trying to help people, but then connecting people to the help that they need. I mean, wondering what we can do about that.
Well, there's just an article in the Globe today about some new housing in Mattapan, which is very exciting. I think there's 150 some odd new units. There were 3,000 applicants. So 3,000 people figured out how to apply, but there's 150 homes. So, I think that we certainly need to make sure that who is getting access, who knows about those homes, that that's fair, and who has that information. But honestly, I think we need more homes. That's the top priority.
Inez, any thoughts?
Yeah, on the connectivity, I think we talked in agreement a little bit about sometimes we create these spaces and expect people to just come and show up. And I think it's always good, again, to just engage the community and what's the best place to fill out an application. Maybe there's a person who's done it that somebody else you can send them to and pay them a stipend for that. There's some just, people are just so creative. I think there's an economy here that we're not talking about because the structures do not work, right? And these days, I'm about not fitting into these systems. It's about creating new ways, because for so many decades and the history of the United States, it's just not working. So, for example, talking about wealth, immigrant communities come here and they figure out how to open up stores and own businesses. Banks don't fund them, but they're helping each other out and making it happen. Again, I can't stress how important it is to think about how that's happening and how we can support that with our own resources, right? The more traditional ways of doing things. We're just missing out, I think, on some of those solutions. You know, it's happening, but I think we can be closer to the people that are actually doing it. And we expect them to somehow fit into our system. I think that we need to start thinking about this a little bit differently.
And I know you were talking about thinking creatively, because, you know, wanting to invest in leaders who are making those kind of solutions, citizens themselves banding together. They've been through the process of looking for affordable housing or something and trying to help other people. But then there's a problem with funding them. You can't expect them all to turn into nonprofits and be able to accept money from, you know, organizations like ours. So,
yeah, I was talking about how in the Federal Reserve we're piloting the Leaders for Equitable Local Economies, and one of the conversations we had with our advisory group earlier on about how do we make sure that the leaders don't end up in an organization that has their own agenda and the leaders are not going to be able to go forward and do what they want to do in their communities. And so we're stipending the leaders. We're investing in supporting their work with some tactical funds. And we just basically said to the leaders, go find a fiscal agent you can trust. That's just going to funnel the money, you know, and just make it easier for you to do the work. And organizations might not like that, but that's just, you know, if you're really about supporting your community, you're again, this is work that somebody else is doing, and your staff can be allocating that time for something else.
Once again, modeling best practices.
I just wanted to say a couple good things that are happening that I neglected to before. So one, in terms of access to information about affordable housing, there's a new website called the Housing Navigator, which is aggregating all that information across the state and making it much easier for people to find out what's there. So that's a great innovation and a great program. And also, I think during COVID, we learned how to do public meetings over Zoom and now hybrid, and that is opening up access to many more people to participate in public conversations. So that's another, you know, I think, and there's an effort to try to make sure we continue that going forward. So just want to throw in a couple of good things that are happening.
Yay, we can always use good things, right? And what's exciting about, Inez, what you're doing is that in addition to modeling, that those organizations, those people, those individuals could become nonprofits. It could find that there are people who want to fund them, that it makes sense, that this is a need that's filled, a lot of people can be helped, so it could be the start of a movement.
Yes, and these individuals are collaborative by nature. They're paired up or in trios in these cities, and what we're finding is that the nonprofits are embracing them and they're becoming champions. So it's about sort of like the influence, right, that you can have as an individual in your community, and how that sort of shapes how the organizations, many anchor organizations, start thinking about their work, because a lot of us have been doing this the same way for a long time.
Exactly. And Ron, you talked earlier about a public-private partnership in order to do more around early education and after-school education. Some examples that might be working, some ways in which, you know, we can invest. Are there corporations involved, or individuals? I mean, what are you talking about, and what's been modeled and what could possibly work?
Sure. I think I'm going to talk a little bit about some aspirational things and then maybe one example. I see Jeff Fuhrer in the audience, so I'm going to be very careful about what I say in distinguish.
You're a very careful man.
Well, a lot of people hold me accountable, as they should. But I want to distinguish between income transfer and wealth transfer, which I think the latter is harder and a more scaled thing to think about. And most of what I'm going to say has to do with income transfer. So first of all, if we get to anything approaching the Common Start legislation proposal, which would cap the cost of early childhood care at 7% of income, that would effectively be an income transfer back to low-income families, some of whom are paying anywhere between $20,000 and $38,000 a year in early childhood tuition. So if we're cutting that in half, if we're cutting that 3/4, you're effectively creating some more resource autonomy in that household. I think where it eventually has to do with wealth is that I think you have to build from a place of having disposable income and the freedom to decide what to do with the next dollar. But if you don't have the next dollar, you don't have that freedom. So this could be a transfer at scale. Amy Kershaw, I hope that you'll appreciate this because this is something that we've worked on together before. I do think there needs to be a system of guaranteed income for early educators. So, thank you. The knock on guaranteed income is often that, one, why would we just give people money? So we're telling on ourselves because we don't trust low-income people to make the same decisions that we make about money, and they make better decisions. And then it tweaks our bootstrap nerve. You know, why didn't they get it done? Why didn't they pull themselves up? Well, because you created systems that either don't produce boots in the first place or they knock on your door and take your boots. So let's check ourselves when that comes up. But I think the horizon that we have here is that through guaranteed income, we can see a not too distant future where we close the compensation gap for early educators, bring them up to the level of district level teachers, something that is more, thank you, concomitant to a livable wage. So we can see that there's a short period at which we've got to fill a gap through guaranteed income. And honestly, the story of poverty in America is working, so we're not giving anybody anything. Everybody is working for whatever it is they have. The third thing that I'll name is really an intersectional point. I do think we see examples of this, and it's where housing and commercial development intersect with early childhood. So Haverhill, Massachusetts, through an organization called A Better Acre, teamed up with Wildflower Montessori to create a new veterans housing development where they co-located the Montessori in the housing development. One, they kind of took off of the table for the most part the development costs for the Montessori and have given them drastically reduced rate, cut a lot of the costs associated with facilities management and some other things. So you can imagine that now this starts to alter a business model that doesn't have much margin to begin with because it's so highly reliant on human capital. But if we don't have to worry about some of this overhead, one, we're investing in small business by doing that, passing that kind of cost savings back onto that, and more importantly, we're investing in small women-led and increasingly women of color-led in businesses in Massachusetts. So I think if we're thinking about making sure that early childhood care providers are a part of the community benefits agreements in commercial business development, that we are doing lease relief and small business tax credit relief and really helping them optimize what the system has to offer, but going further than that with what private capital can do in the development process, we create a different reality for that small business ecosystem and for the families attached to it.
Thank you, Ron. So it's hard to believe, but we've come to the end of our time here. But I did want to give our wonderful panelists an opportunity to answer one last brief comment. What gives you the most hope that change is possible in the Bay State? Starting with you, Lorna.
Well, I'm really inspired by the number of women of color and people of color that have been elected to office. There's been a major increase there, and that's so important, right, to have that access to political power and representation in those spaces. And as well with our youth, working a lot with schools. Our youth have the answers. We just need to listen and let them lead. So just being really inspired by, Black Lives Matter movement and the climate change activism. Our youth are really leading the way, so I'm really inspired by that.
Amen. Joe?
Well, plus one on that, and not just in elected office, but across institutions, including the nonprofit sector, we're seeing that change, which is great. This might be in the category, if you wish it enough, it'll come true, but I feel there's a greater recognition that we can't solve these problems without system and structural change. We can't just serve our way through these problems. And so I'm excited about the United Way's new initiative, because I think to achieve population level change, you have to change the system, not just individuals. And as there's more recognition of that, I think we'll see more big scale change.
Excellent. Corey?
What gives me hope that change is possible is that when it comes to hope, all you need is a seed, right? A small seed is all you need, and it can grow and expand, and real change can be made. And that seed is the fact that this event is even happening in the first place, right? That we're all here. But
absolutely.
And we're all here, and it's not just people my age or people Joe's age.
Thin line there.
It's all ages, because we all need to work together to make the change that we want to see.
Excellent. True.
Thanks for not looking this way.
Inez?
I'm hopeful in that there is change is happening, right? Like sometimes we're like, when is change? It's there. And I always tell our teams who have long-term visions of 10 years, I think I saw somebody here from JPNDC that was like, oh my God, think about Jackson Square flashbacks. But takes a lot of time to get things sort of done and going. And what I tell folks is celebrate the small wins. Keep that momentum alive, because it's a long fight. And I find joy in just those little wins. And we try to celebrate them as much as possible.
Liz, I'm gonna give you one hope and one despair, and they're related to one another. So ironically, I think my hope is in aspects of the pandemic, because it's over the course of the pandemic that we realize that we can actually invent the things that our communities need. Mutual aid societies, learning pods, you can probably name a number of things for which we used our ingenuity. We didn't ask a whole bunch of permission. And as somebody who's not originally from the Boston area, one of my critiques of Boston's culture is that Boston makes too many appeals to power for the things it wants to do. Just do it. Worry about the hierarchy later. My despair is that we showed up, we showed out, we proved to ourselves that we could be our own saviors, but our appetite for the normal that was not working for us is still too great. The idea that we're clamoring to get back to something that was pre-pandemic, to a bunch of stuff that was undermining us, I have a lot of despair about. So I hope that we will lean in together to all of the brilliance and ingenuity that came out of the crisis, but realize that it doesn't take the depths of that kind of crisis to get us to do the best that we can do for ourselves.
Amen. So thank you to our wonderful panelists and for United Way for this opportunity, and to all of you for your time and attention. So it's time for us all to embrace hope and not despair. And as Corey said, let's go out and spread some seeds and grow some change and celebrate, as Inez said, the small successes. Thank you all. Great job. Great job. Awesome.
Wow. That is a hard act to follow. I have always given my advice to not get up after an inspiring speaker, and we just had a stage full of them. So how about another hand for our incredible panel? And thank you to Liz for moderating as well. We are running just a little bit behind. I do want to let folks know that we will We will endeavor to get you out of here as soon as possible. We just have a couple of more things left on today's agenda. I talked earlier about our new way of doing things at United Way, and the discussions this morning reminded me of a recent mention of the old United Way. Last month, we lost a legend in Boston, a staunch supporter and advocate for our communities of color and for the city at large, community organizer and political activist in every sense of the terms. Of course, I'm talking about Mel King. Upon Mel's passing, an article mentioned that nearly 50 years ago, he led a protest at the annual dinner of the United Fund, which was the precursor to the United Way. He and others felt like the distribution of funding wasn't making it to the communities that needed support the most. And while many of us at today's United Way were surprised to learn about this moment in our history, and many of us were upset to see it in print, I thought it was important to highlight today because this is the exact opposite of how we operate as an organization now and moving forward. It is a new day at United Way. The challenges we're facing across our region and indeed across our country require a uniter. That's who we are, and we feel the imperative to leverage our resources and our demonstrated ability to connect people, organizations, and institutions to drive lasting change. You just heard about our refined impact areas, which I will dig deeper into a bit. However, our entire organization is reimagining every way that we work to truly advance equity-based solutions that drive population-level change. We are also being upfront about directing resources to the people and communities that we know need our support the most. We're prioritizing investments in organizations focused on populations that are financially vulnerable and face systemic barriers to success, particularly Black, Latino, and Hispanic populations. We are reimagining our corporate partnerships, recognizing that companies are harnessing their philanthropic generosity and capital in ways that are very different, very strategic, and strongly aligned with their business interests and priorities. We're changing our approach to bring a portfolio of opportunities to our corporate partners, including educating employees and companies about the key issues facing our region. Through a partnership with the partnership, we're providing volunteer opportunities where employees can be placed on nonprofit boards. And leveraging, and in addition to that, leveraging the influence capital of employees to drive policy and systemic change. We've built up an incredible development team that is embracing community-centric fundraising, a model that prioritizes the wants and needs of our community and moves us away from our historically donor-centered fundraising approach. We're also redefining for our organization what our communities of focus are. We have a very large footprint, and within that, there are communities with higher concentrations of poverty than others. According to 2021 data, nearly 300,000 people in our footprint have incomes below the federal poverty rate, which we can all agree is not truly a rate that allows for a sustainable life. More than 2/3 of them live in these 12 communities. They are in alphabetical order: Boston, Cambridge, Chelsea, Haverhill, Lawrence, Lowell, Lynn, Malden, Quincy, Revere, Salem, and Taunton. By building on our established relationships and deepening investments in these cities and towns, we will be able to drive tangible outcomes for individuals and families. Also, to fully understand our impact and to hold ourselves accountable to advancing the change we need to experience in our communities, we will track our progress by closely monitoring outcome measures while working towards our desired results. We worked with one of the world's leading measurement organizations to determine which population-level metrics to track within and across impact areas in order to measure our progress and hold ourselves and our partners accountable. I mentioned that we've been doing a lot of listening to our community and stakeholders over the last 18 months or so to help us gather their important feedback for this new direction. Last spring, we held listening sessions in town halls, what we called community conversations, speaking with hundreds of stakeholders and bringing in their knowledge to inform new funding opportunities and source new partners for our work. We heard directly from community members what economic prosperity means to them, and from those discussions, 4 distinct avenues to prosperity emerged. We've seen for some time now that the lingering economic impacts of the pandemic and the stark racial and ethnic disparities in our communities make financial well-being inaccessible for far too many. In addition to our emergency and crisis response work, these avenues are drawn from United Way's work within the region, and we've worked to refine and adapt our vision as we aim to drive population-level change. Expanding our economic inclusion and wealth-building work is critical in closing the racial wealth gap. I'm so proud of our work to reinforce credit as a key lever to financial sustainability, removing barriers to success and financial opportunity by empowering families to build credit and create wealth. When we talked to community members, we heard often that financial prosperity and well-being meant the ability to breathe a sigh of relief every now and then, and to enjoy life, to have a solid financial foundation. We are tackling head-on those barriers to opportunity, the discriminatory practices, and the intentional and systemic withholding of information and knowledge that perpetuates the inequities that we see today. Another area of focus for our work is strengthening youth and young adult pathways. We've recently gathered key insights to inform our work in this space from 2 incredibly impactful initiatives, Rising to the Challenge and our Launch Initiative. Through a partnership with the City of Boston's Offices of Housing and Human Services, Rising to the Challenge housed more than 500 homeless youth, resulting in a 44% decline in individual youth homelessness from 2019 to 2022. And through our Launch Initiative, we focused on supporting opportunity youth, or young people ages 18 to 24, who are disconnected or underconnected to school or work, and help them reach their education and career goals. We are taking aim at what we've learned from these critical programs to inform our youth and young adult pathways work, which will help develop stronger post-secondary pathways and bridge the siloed systems that make it nearly impossible for our young people to navigate the organizations and services available to them. United Way is also reaffirming our commitment to expanding access to high-quality early education and out-of-school time opportunities for children, which in turn promotes opportunities for parents and caregivers to work and thrive in their communities. I want to take a moment to welcome Commissioner Kershaw, Commissioner of Early Care and Education, and Kristen McSwain, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Early Childhood Education, both of whom are critical partners in this work. And I should have said a second ago that we're honored to have Chief Jose Masso here from the City of Boston, who's a key partner in our Pathways work as well. We know that without reliable, affordable, quality education and care, financial stability is not possible for so many families. Massachusetts especially has struggled with this, and we are optimistic about the renewed energy from advocates and legislators pushing for deeper investment in this sector. Finally, ensuring a greater amount of affordable, stable housing in the Commonwealth is a top priority. As was mentioned earlier, we are particularly focused on expanding supportive housing, which combines safe, stable housing with integrated, comprehensive services to support individuals and families experiencing complex, compounding challenges in addition to housing instability. Expanding affordable housing and supportive services will alleviate the burden placed on our emergency housing response system, which struggles to engage service providers and and bring together the siloed systems of healthcare, education, and employment to support our residents in need. These avenues are interrelated and can form the foundation for success and prosperity. We heard that repeatedly in our community conversations, and my life is also a testament to that. I grew up in Somerville and come from a family that really struggled from the lack of a strong financial foundation, which meant the climb to opportunity was steep for me as a child and a young adult. But I had access to programs and opportunities that, when knit together, exposed me to the key avenues of prosperity. I was part of an experimental pre-K program that really showed me and my family the stability and support that quality early education can provide. My mom had a Section 8, now called a Housing Choice Voucher, that provided stability and certainty for our family. And we had access to other vital services that gave our family what we needed to get by, so she could be focused on supporting me in every way she could. I had early exposure to jobs and internships in the nonprofit sector that gave me a peek of what a career pathway could look like in this field. And as a young adult, after getting myself into significant credit card debt, I had a mentor who taught me about credit and savings and the elements of a strong financial foundation, which led to 10 years ago, me being the first member of my family to own my own home, our own home. Having those formative experiences in my life, from quality early education to greater financial fluency, were critical to securing my well-being, to my prosperity. So I need not go any further than my own experience to know that weaving these avenues of prosperity together can lift people across our region. I am deeply convinced that this path forward for our United Way is what our region needs from us today. And I look forward to working closely with all of you here today, in person, virtually, and in spirit, and the thousands of United Way supporters and champions. The responsibility of leading this organization is profound, but with your wind under our wings, we can achieve the change we hope to see in our region. Thank you for all you do to help United Way thrive, and thank you for listening today. So my last responsibility on stage today is to introduce an exciting new program that we launched earlier this year. During our community listening work, we heard loud and clear that important work was happening at the grassroots of communities across our region, efforts that we had not yet been in a position to identify. To pull out some of those community-based best practices and to begin to signal the new direction for United Way, we launched our Community Action Grants program. I'm incredibly proud of this entire initiative, from the ease of the application process to the focus on recognizing diverse and inclusive leadership, to ensuring that community voice drove the design and review process. All of our grantees are doing important work in one, some, or all of our avenues to prosperity, affecting change in their communities right now. The Community Action Grants are aimed at signaling to our stakeholders that we're serious about partnering with organizations and collectives in very different ways than we have historically. So to help us celebrate our grantees, I'd like to invite United Way's Chief of Community Impact, Carly Osceola, to the stage.
Thanks, Bob. So I know that we are over time, and I'm going to keep this quick, but I was thinking about what Inez was saying about investing in and supporting and acknowledging local leaders, and that's our opportunity here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the grant. Bob just gave some background. All of our 17 grantees received a one-year unrestricted grant of $15,000 to do the work they're already doing in communities, to connect people, to reach out, to focus on advocacy, power building, and other initiatives. So I'm going to say the names of the organizations. Most of them are here today. I'd like you to stand up when you hear your organization, and then after we close today, we'd like everyone to come up for a group photo. So, 17 of them. First is to Chelsea Black Community. Thank you, in the back. All right, how about the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization? Massachusetts Immigrant Collaborative. Woo, thank you. Maverick Landing Community Services in East Boston. The Latino Coalition in Haverhill. Thank you. The Latino Support Network serving Lynn, Chelsea, Revere, and Salem. Thank you. Thrive Communities of Massachusetts serving Lawrence and Lowell, focusing on incarceration. Harbor Cove. Thank you. La Collaborativa, serving Chelsea, Boston, Lynn, Chelsea, and Everett. Essex County Community Organization, serving Lynn and Salem. New England United for Justice. Sarepta Women and Children Empowerment Center, Incorporated. First Teacher. Yeah. Fortaleza Incorporated. Yeah. Youth Justice and Power Union. La Comunidad. Yeah. And finally, Taunton Diversity Network. Thank you all, and if you do have time for other folks, find those folks, hear a little bit about what they're doing. They are incredible organizations doing incredibly important work in their communities. Thank you all so much.
We have one last speaker who's going to close us out. I'm honored to bring to the stage Senior Vice President for Human Resources at Sun Life, current Vice Chair of our board, and soon to be Chair of our board, Tammy Wortham.
All right, everyone. Classic last speaker, right? Okay, different hair, yes, different hair, different day. So I'm going to be quick. First of all, can you feel this today? Can you feel something's happening? I feel there's a little something happening today. First, let me introduce myself again, Tammy Wortham. It is wonderful to be here, but most importantly, thank you all for being here. It's not easy to get down here, to make a point, to be here for the day, but to listen today. Thank you, thank you, thank you for that. But also, before I continue, I just want to take a moment to thank all of us back at United Way headquarters. Collective exhale, everyone. It's happened. It's happened. Today has happened, and it's been fantastic. So all of you back there, we're all with you here. Thank you for everything you do. So today is the new chapter. She said, what's new, right? United Way, I've heard about it. Yep, I get it. Same hands, right? Same colors. Colors aren't bad. But what I will say, though, is something new is happening. And guess what? You here are at the beginning of it. Listen to what Ron said. Oh, my gosh, Ron. Can I just? Anyway, Ron said at the pandemic, something happened. We learned that we could figure out new and better ways of doing things, right? Attacking old challenges in new ways. So one of the things that's so interesting today that's happening with United Way that you should be so proud of is that centering of the community. Community voice. What did you hear up here? You heard all the passion in saying, there is a group that understands what needs to be done. Guess what we're going to do at United Way? More of. Not that we didn't do it before, but more of. We're going to listen our way to impact. We're going to listen to it today. We're not going to say, yep, we got it all figured out. We got all the stats. It's all in the books. We're actually going to turn and listen and say, maybe you just might know best, right? And so when you go home and you tell your friends, what did I do today? What did I invest in? I invest in what the people in the community said was important for them. That's the impact I made today, right? It's not an organization. It's the ability to do something different. Guess what we can do? Imagine the possibilities of galvanizing our resources. Think about the passion that we have, right? The conviction that we have. The other word that I would say is the resources. I know everyone thinks that's a word corporate uses, all the resources. Each and every one of you is a resource to access, a resource to new thinking, a resource to changing people's lives, a resource to making impact on our communities. So guess what? We're going to do it. We're going to do it today and tomorrow and the next day. We're going to galvanize the people. We're going to fund the work. We're going to change the narrative, and we're going to tell the story. And guess what? I get a chance to be right along with that. And I'm pretty darn excited about that, and you all should be too. So today is the day to not say everything that we did before was wrong, right? Remember getting back, right, Ron? Everyone wants to go back before the pandemic. What happened? It was an opportunity for us to think differently. So take all of this new momentum and what you've heard today and bring that forward. Bring it back to your companies. When they say, what do we do? How does DE&I important? You know how it's important. What'd you do? You worked with an organization that's listening. Because every step that you take, the organization is going to help you bring that to right where it's going to have the impact. And not only because we know best, because we have the access to bring, what is the word that Bob used? Knit it all together. But I'm going to leave you today with, of course, I have to steal what Liz said. Think about each of those categories of what we do, right? Homelessness, child impact, economic stability, pathways. Isn't that just what we all want for ourselves? Stop thinking about it as someone else's effort. It's everything we want for anyone we care about. So listen to what Liz said. Just expand that circle a little bit more. Go home and say, you know what I'm doing for people? What I would want done, anyone to do for me and my family. So today, take this. Go forward with it. Recognize that it's a new United Way. I'm on the darn journey. And I'm not going alone. I look too good to go alone, okay? You're coming with me. Thank you so much for today, and I'm excited about the United Way. Thank you so much. Have a great day. All right, guys.